Hello and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, hi, I'm Sarah. I'm a fourth year PhD candidate. And today I wanted to bring you a video all about the knowledge management system and note-taking software, Obsidian. So I made a video a little while ago, like a couple years ago, about note-taking for students with ADHD and various methods that you could use for that. And I touched on how I use the software Obsidian for my note-taking and organization, and not only taking individual notes, but also making various connections between them and identifying patterns within my knowledge. And since then, I've had a few different questions from people asking me things like how to set up Obsidian, how to get started with it, what kind of templates to use for it, and more about how I structure my own Obsidian and my own kind of workflow with it as a grad student, and a grad student with ADHD specifically. So this video is going to be a bit of a follow-up on that first video, and I'll address some of your questions about how I use Obsidian, and I'll specifically take you through some of my workflow as to how I'm using it as a grad student working on my dissertation. My PhD is in religious studies, and I'm primarily using ethnographic methods for my primary research. But I also have degrees in other areas of the social sciences and humanities, specifically English Lit and digital humanities, and also anthropology. So I have a broad kind of range of knowledge and a broad range of interests. I consider myself to be a very interdisciplinary researcher, and I find that Obsidian has been especially helpful for finding and building connections across disciplinary boundaries. Also, as someone with ADHD, I find that Obsidian can be very helpful for organizing and making sense of my thoughts that otherwise might seem kind of chaotic and all over the place. And I find that people with ADHD were often very good at identifying and seeing patterns in things that neurotypical people or others may not necessarily see, or connections that others might not necessarily make. And I find that Obsidian is really great for nurturing and expressing that. So with that, let's get into how you can start using Obsidian. If you're just starting out with Obsidian, it may seem a little bit daunting at first. You might be wondering how you're going to get from this blank, empty vault to these vast, interconnected networks of knowledge that you might have seen. There is a little bit of a learning curve with Obsidian, and it does take some time to develop your network and to create these connections, but I think that it's really worth it. For me, Obsidian has really become my second brain. It's important to keep in mind that your Obsidian will grow with you as you develop and as you input more knowledge. Also know that there's no one correct way to set up an Obsidian vault for academic research or anything else. I would really encourage you to explore what other people have done with Obsidian, and I'll leave some helpful videos below to see what might work best for you. So I'm just showing you how I created my Obsidian vault for my own PhD work. So let's get started with setting up some folders that will house all of your notes and basically organize all of your knowledge. So to add a folder, you'll just click the new folder icon up here, and you can also create subfolders or folders within folders. I have a few main folders here, like dissertation, fieldwork, papers and presentations, and readings. So if I go into my graph view, you can see that I've assigned each of these main folders a different color. And in the graph, the little nodes within these folders, the notes within each folder, shows up as this different color. The majority of my nodes or my notes are from my readings folder, but I can also see that I have a lot of green nodes forming over here, which is notes from my fieldwork folder. This is where I'm keeping all of my fieldwork notes, so things like interview transcriptions, notes on participant observation, and so on. Then I also have this folder where I keep my papers and presentations and abstracts and things like that, including ones that I've written in the past and ones that I'm currently working on. Then here in my dissertation folder, this is where I keep things like reports, proposals, and then thoughts and ideas for my dissertation, which I will discuss more later. When I was first in the process of creating my Obsidian, I started by adding notes to my readings folder. So So if I look in this folder, I can see that I have subfolders for all of these different areas of study and different disciplines. And I have subfolders for when I need to kind of organize things even further. I keep my notes on all sorts of readings that I've done in here, including for past degrees, past courses, papers that I've written, and of course, readings for my dissertation. The notes are all labeled with the citation for the reading, and then I'll have the full bibliographical reference here as well. So let's create a new reading note here. I've recently been reading a lot about solar punk for my dissertation, so I'll just use a reading that I've been doing on that. And when I start a new note for a reading, I'll start with that bibliographic information. And I used to fill this out by hand, but now I've recently started using the reference manager Zotero, which makes things so much easier. So I'll just copy and paste the entry from there. There are also some ways to integrate Zotero into Obsidian more kind of seamlessly and easily. And I've played around with some of these methods and I do like some of them, but I won't really get into that here. It's probably a subject for another video. Next, I'm going to set up the layout for taking my note using what's called callouts in Obsidian, which are these colored boxes that you can use in your note to make certain information really stand out. So to insert callouts, you'll likely want to go into settings and then set up a hotkey shortcut for them. And you can make that whatever's good for you. There are a variety of different callouts that you can use in Obsidian, and you can find a full list of these online, and I'll also leave a link with a reference to that below. But the default callout when you use that hotkey is just note, and you can change this to assign it different colors and symbols. The colors and symbols will change though depending on what Obsidian theme you're using, and I usually use the theme prism because I really like the way that looks personally. So you can use different callouts like abstract, info, example, things like that, but you can then name your callout box whatever you want to. I just have a page set up in my Obsidian like workflow file where I have the callouts that I typically use already in there, so I can just copy and paste all of this into a new note whenever I'm creating it, and it's all just kind of there laid out for me. So the way that I organize my notes is by first having the abstract at the top and then key points and then connections, and then I have the space where I actually take those notes. Then throughout the note, I'll have callout blocks for questions. So I use this block to leave questions for myself, like if something the author has said has prompted a question for me to think about with regards to my dissertation, if it's prompted a question for me for something to investigate, explore further, if there's like a concept or a theory or something that I don't understand, I'll leave a note here for myself to look into that further or follow up on this. Then at the bottom, I have this part where I put my own thoughts about the reading. So if I take some issue with the author's points maybe, or if I think that it might be specifically relevant for a particular part of my dissertation, or like a paper I'm writing, I'll put those thoughts here. So I don't usually put my own thoughts throughout the actual reading note because I don't want to get my own thoughts confused with the author's thoughts. So I'll just use these kind of specific call out blocks so that I can clearly make that distinction. As I'm taking my notes too, or sometimes at the end, I'll go through and highlight the especially important part. And I use different highlighter colors for different themes that are key to my research. And I keep a document here just to remind me of the color coding system that I'm using. I know that other people will use different highlighter colors to distinguish like different elements of a text, like for example, to indicate the author's thesis, main arguments, their examples, their discussion section or whatever. But for the research that I do within the social sciences and humanities and ethnographic research, I think that highlighting themes is a lot more important, especially as I'm working on like organizing and writing my dissertation. So once you have a few different notes done and made, you can start making connections between them. And this is where I think Obsidian really shines, where I think it's really excellent for note-taking and organizing is in making these connections. When I'm taking my notes, if the author of the text that I'm taking notes on references something that I've already read and already have a previous note for, I'll make a connection to that note. So here, for example, the author has made a reference to a text by Donna Haraway that is important and is something that I'd already read. So I'll create a link there to that note. And in order to create these links between different notes, you'll use double square brackets and then put in the name of the note that you want it to connect to there. And this process of hyperlinking basically is what connects these notes to other notes within that mind map graph. If the reading that I'm taking these notes on makes a reference to something that I haven't read yet, but something that I think might be important for me, I will make a new note for it. So usually when I do this, I'll just put in the bibliographic reference for the note, and I won't really fill in any of the other stuff yet because I don't want to break out of that note-taking workflow that I'm likely to be in to kind of jump to a different reference and start working on that. So I'll just make this new note, won't fill it in right away, and it'll just be there as a reminder of something that I need to come back to later and something that I need to look into more. Then I also put important connections in the connections call out box up at the top of my note. So here I'll include important references within the text, but I'll also make my own connections to other notes, to other readings. If it's reminded me of another text or something, or if I think that the author makes an interesting counterpoint or an argument that goes against another reading that I've done, or anything like that, any kind of connection that I find, I'm going to put that here in this connections call out box. When I'm taking notes or looking back on them and I want to be able to actually visualize the connections, I can do so by using the local graph view here, which allows me to see all of the connections to that one particular note. Then from there, I can toggle between these interconnected notes, which can help me see what kind of other connections there might be or that might arise. Making these links between different readings is an important part of my note-taking process, but I also don't just make connections between readings. I also use Obsidian to help me make connections to the primary field research I'm doing for my dissertation, and essentially also as a way to outline my dissertation. So if I go back into the dissertation folder and I go into this subfolder thoughts and ideas, this is where I keep the initial thoughts that I have about my research. I have these subfolders organized by different themes that are merging as I'm doing this research. And within these folders, I have various notes that are also themselves sub-themes or important points of discussion for me. Basically, there's some of the overarching ideas that I've been engaging with and thinking about as I've been doing this research. They're really where I'm thinking through and brainstorming my dissertation. So I won't show you most of these notes because I don't want to risk the anonymity of any of my research participants, and also because this is like very early stages of my dissertation and I don't really want to show that yet. But I can create a new note here to give you an idea of my brainstorming and workflow. So I'll make a note for solar punk because this is something that I've been looking into a lot lately. And maybe I'll start the note by providing a definition of what solar punk is, drawing on some of the reference notes that I have. Using the split view is helpful here as I can read my notes on one side and then do my brainstorming on the other side. Solar punk is a lot of things, so it's difficult to summarize it in a note here, but generally I want to say that it's a genre of fiction, an aesthetic, but most importantly, it's a real vision for the future that some individuals and communities are working towards making a reality. It's an optimistic view of the future where total environmental degradation and civilizational collapse is not seen as inevitable, and that climate change is something we can address through creative and communal means, though this will require radical system change. The movement at its core is anti-capitalist, anti-colonial, and largely ecocentric rather than just human-centric. And while it's a vision for the future, it's also about enacting this transformation in the present. Solar punk really started as an online movement, and so the way online communities have defined it and imagined it is really important to the definition. So I'll include some of that here. Then, because some of the communities that I'm researching for my dissertation exemplify these solar punk qualities, I'll look at my field notes for instances where this topic or related elements has come up, either in participant observation or interviews. I'll include blurbs from these field notes or interview transcriptions, and I'll link those notes. And then I will brainstorm, and I'll reflect on these bits and consider how I want to bring this into my dissertation and what kind of ideas or arguments seem to be emerging here. Since my dissertation also includes virtual ethnography, specifically looking at social media, I'll likely also link some notes that I've taken on particular social media posts that relate to this. Then I'll go look at different readings on the topic and I'll pull some notes from that. And again, I'll think about how this is significant for my dissertation. I also tend to do a lot of my brainstorming and reflecting by hand using just pen and paper, so I'll transcribe those notes and bring them in here too. And then I'll just continue making those links between primary and secondary research. I like to keep these brainstorming note files pretty limited to one particular topic. So if it starts expanding into another related but potentially separate idea, I'll create a new note for it and then link it here. And this is basically starting to outline my dissertation. This is where it's really taking shape. I may do another video about taking and organizing field notes at some point in the future if that's of interest to anyone. It's just really difficult to show here because, again, I really want to retain that anonymity of everyone that I'm working with. All of these different kind of functions of Obsidian I just find really helpful for my research and writing workflow. Like I said before, though, there are plenty of other ways of setting up your Obsidian, not just this way. This is just the way that I've done it. Someone recently told me about how they're organizing all of their notes by having an overarching note for each major theme that's relevant to their dissertation. And then they'll list all of the different reading notes that fall under this theme within that note so that they're all connected to that main central node. Other people use Obsidian as more of a Zettelkasten, which is its own knowledge management system, where instead of having these individual notes for different readings, each note is a particular idea, and you're kind of making connections between these different ideas as this train of thought, and they're all kind of connecting to an overarching topic that then connects to other topics, which is just a different way of using this system. The Zettelkasten method has been said to really improve memory recall and also maybe especially good for studying and retaining important information. And I feel like it might be especially helpful for people with ADHD because it's really just a way of managing and returning to knowledge and information in a way that it just makes a lot of sense. And I don't personally use this method for note organization, but I could see myself using it. I just didn't really set up my Obsidian in that way, but maybe it's something that I'll think about doing in the future. If you're interested, though, a YouTuber called Morgan makes excellent videos on using Obsidian in this way, so I would definitely recommend checking out her videos, which I'll link some of below. And that is pretty much all that I have for you today. So thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I hope that this video was helpful. If you have any questions at all, please do let me know in the comments below, and I will try to answer them as best that I can. Also, if you have any tips or tricks or suggestions for using Obsidian, it would be fantastic if you could leave those in the comments below as well. I'd love to hear them, and I'm sure that others could definitely benefit from your suggestions too. Thank you so much, and bye for now.